on Thursday, U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhardt seemed inclined to see the partial unsealing of the FBI affidavit used to justify the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. During a federal court hearing in West Palm Beach, Florida, Judge Reinhardt gave the Department of Justice 1 week to submit redactions and return the affidavit to court by next Thursday at noon for review and maybe its potential release. Along with parts of the affidavit, Reinhardt has also released portions of the warrant, which include the warrant application, the motion to seal it, and also the cover sheet. Just a lot of generalities there. But the cover sheet, the DOJ describes the potential crimes as the willful retention of national defense information, concealment or removal of government records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. And now President Trump in the last few hours has said he is going on the offense, saying on Truth Social last night that his team will soon file a major legal motion. So what does he plan to do? Trump attorney Alina Habba joins us now. Alina, great to see you. And, you know, first off, I have to ask you, this is really amazing with the president saying that he is planning on doing a major legal motion. What can we expect? We're seeing some of the comments that he said, you know, he's planning on filing a major motion pertaining to the, quote, Fourth Amendment. That's, of course, illegal search and seizure, that everybody's entitled to appropriate protections there, saying that it will be filed soon concerning, quote, the illegal break-in of my home. What can we expect, and when do you think that might happen?
Unfortunately, I don't think my answer will be as juicy as you'd like because I am covered by attorney-client privilege and I can't really get into some of those details. What my client has said is obviously accurate in terms of the fact that there is a motion pending that will be later revealed and it will speak for itself. I think people can expect that it will involve the Fourth Amendment violations and issues that we've seen, that we've discussed all week and last week in terms of what did and did not go well, what was inaccurate, what was too broad, and what was not protected by the Constitution and was a violation of the Constitution and the amendments that we're all allowed to have to protect us.
Well, and you know, it's amazing, Alina, that it was such a sweeping warrant. I mean, clearly when they went in, and as we talked about, they even took the passports. It seems like they took sort of everything, and that's not what's supposed to be. When you go into a warrant, you're supposed to be pretty specific as to what's going in. So it's going to be interesting. I think he's got some really powerful things to be able to present. Is there a sense of when, you and I have both known the president for a while, and usually when he says he's going to do something, he always follows through. Is there a sense that it's going to be in a few days? Is there a sort of sense of a timetable?
Soon, very soon.
Very soon. So probably this week, would that be right to say?
I think that any motion that he instructs a team or the team advises is done pretty swiftly. I think with something like this, we really do have to move swiftly. I think that there's a lot of concern in terms of exposing the motives, pretext, and when you're protecting your rights, you really have to make sure that you do so in an expeditious manner so that your client is always protected and preserves any arguments he may have. The thing is, Rita, with this, yes, you're right, warrants need to be narrow in scope, but there's another issue, which is this is such a public hearing, this is such a public investigation. We're actually not in a suit per se, so it's a little bit tricky legally, and I can speak generally to the legal issues with that. You know, there was a hearing obviously on Thursday. That was done by, you know, the parties that Tom Fitton and his team in Judicial Watch, who are great, and they wanted to reveal it, but we're technically not a party to this action. So there is some feedback from some of the left-wing media that, you know, well, then why aren't we filing motions? It's difficult. It's a tricky thing. You have to look at the ins and outs of something as complicated as this. It's an investigation stage. It's much like my Attorney General investigation. It's not a typical lawsuit. There hasn't been a complaint filed yet.
No, you're right. There's only certain things that you can do. I totally understand that. You know what's interesting too, Alina, and I listened to the hearing, the comments that came out afterwards, and in the hearing, this was stunning to me, that the Department of Justice basically said the reason that they didn't want the affidavit out there, and I know that President Trump has said, put it out there, let's see it, and understandably so, to see what they were using as the premise to justify the raid, and was it a legitimate premise, how much was in there. But one of the things I was stunned about was in the hearing, the Department of Justice said that this, they didn't want to disrupt or hurt anything tied to this early phase of the investigation. And my first reaction was, early phase of an investigation, that you would go into a president's home and do, you know, a broad sweeping search warrant in, quote, an early phase of an investigation. That would be something you would do at the end of an investigation. What was your reaction? And also the president's reaction? That had to be stunning to say, what, we're just going in and seeing what we can get at an early phase?
Right. It is stunning. I think that, look, I would like to be positive in terms of thinking that the Department of Justice and the FBI are doing things absolutely the right way. Do I think that on the face of this warrant, it's obvious that that was not done? I do. I think that it was overly broad. You know, I hope that the Department of Justice is really certain on what they're doing. I think if they're saying it's the early phase and they were hoping to basically backdoor it and get documents and then claim that he wasn't cooperating, that's going to be a tough sell, because as we've stated, which is now very public, he was cooperating. He had let them in June. So I'm still at a loss, kind of like you and everyone else, in terms of what there is that is the investigation per se that they didn't feel that they could just do with him as they were for the past 3 months.
Yeah, there are so many unanswered questions. What about also, real quick, Alina, there's been word about the surveillance footage at Mar-a-Lago, and there's been a lot of reports that you guys are thinking of possibly releasing some of that. Any word on when that could maybe happen? Because that would be interesting to see.
You know, I'm glad you brought this up. I actually was reading an article this morning that was so disturbing to me that stated in some way that we would want to put agents in jeopardy. First of all, that's very incorrect. President Trump and the Trump team that I work with have so much respect for agencies that do things the right way, follow the law, and we would always want to protect those individuals. We understand there has been extreme backlash from some people that, in my opinion, could really use some mental health assistance. You know, this is an investigation, but we have to do it legally and ethically, and we always will. If those tapes are released, they would be released privately in the correct way, and, you know, with the agency in tandem. They would never be released in a way that would jeopardize any of the people that were just doing their job. And I do believe that, you know, I do believe some people are just doing their job, and it usually comes from the top when there's corruption. So I have to be very clear on that. I think that it would be done the right way. I think that if the DOJ wants to see them, we would, of course, be working with them to give them anything they need, just as we always have.
Absolutely. Well, it is great to have you here, and we're going to be following what happens with this major motion that the president put the word out on. And of course, all of us are going to be watching closely. Great to talk with you, Alina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you.
You too.